Captain Ryan Mendez clenched his jaw as the colossal Tsar Kalan flagship loomed ahead, its gaping maw spewing forth a relentless swarm of fighters. The Intrepid's bridge pulsed with a frantic energy, consoles flickering with wild data streams and urgent voices. With a fierce determination etched into his sharp features, Mendez barked orders into the comms. All hands, brace for impact. Gunners, target their engines. Helm, evasive maneuvers, now! As the Intrepid lurched violently to the side, a deafening barrage of plasma fire streaked past the viewport, barely missing the ship's hull. Mendez's eyes narrowed, focusing on the enemy's movements as if he could will their destruction. He glanced towards Captain Theodore "Theo" Caldwell, who stood stoically at the tactical station, his silver hair reflecting the harsh light of the battle. Mendez felt a swell of gratitude for the old warhorse's steadfast presence. An alarm blared overhead, and Mendez's gaze darted to the main viewer as another wave of Tsar Cullen fighters emerged from the inky void. He mentally calculated their chances, each passing second weighing on him like a mountain. With a deep breath, Mendez addressed the crew, his voice steady and resolute. "We need to create an opening, buy ourselves some time. Commander Russo, target their communication array. If we can disrupt their command network, it might give us the edge we need." Russo nodded curtly and relayed the order, the Intrepid's turrets pivoting to aim at the designated target. Mendez watched, heart pounding, as the first volley of torpedoes streaked through the darkness, finding their mark with a blinding flash. The Tsar Kalan armada faltered, their formation disrupted by the sudden loss of communication. Seizing the opportunity, Mendez issued a new set of orders, his mind racing with tactical possibilities. "Helm, plot a course through their weakened line. Gunners, focus all firepower on the flagship's reactor core. It's time we showed these bastards what the Intrepid is truly made of." The crew sprang into action, their movements a well-choreographed dance of skill and determination. The Intrepid surged forward, slicing through the disorganized Tsar Kalan forces like a knife through butter. As they closed in on the flagship, Mendez could feel the tide of battle beginning to turn. Yet, he knew that their survival still hung precariously in the balance. With a steely resolve, he tightened his grip on the armrests of his chair, bracing himself for the final confrontation. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and Captain Ryan Mendez would stop at nothing to ensure their survival. The Intrepid bucked violently as a volley of plasma torpedoes streaked past, singeing the ship's hull and sending a cascade of sparks raining down from the ceiling. Lieutenant Sam Hawkins gritted his teeth, hands clenched tightly around the flight stick, knuckles white with the strain. He could feel the weight of the ship beneath his fingertips, the hum of the engines vibrating through his very bones. The scent of burning metal and ozone filled the air, a bitter reminder of the destruction that loomed just beyond the Intrepid's fragile hull. "Sam, can you keep her steady?" Captain Mendez's voice crackled over the intercom, the tension in his tone barely concealed. "On it, Captain," Sam replied, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. He couldn't help but think of his family, of the life that had been stolen from them by the merciless Tsar Cullen. The thought fueled his determination, and he pushed the ship to its limits, weaving through the hailstorm of enemy fire with a precision that belied his years. In the ship's command center, Dr. Elliot DeSantos hunched over his console, fingers flying across the keys as he analyzed the data streaming in from the Intrepid's sensors. He could feel the sweat trickling down his brow, his heart hammering in his chest. The Tsar Cullen invasion had left him shaken, the memories of the carnage and destruction still fresh in his mind. But he refused to let fear control him, focusing instead on the task at hand. "Captain, I've identified a potential weakness in the Tsar Cullen flagship's reactor core," DeSantos announced, his voice betraying a hint of excitement. "If we can exploit it, we might be able to cripple their entire fleet." Mendez's eyes narrowed, a spark of hope igniting in his gaze. "Lieutenant Hawkins, can you get us within firing range?" Sam's grip tightened on the flight stick, the muscles in his arms tensing as he prepared for the delicate maneuver. "I'll do my best, Captain," he replied, his voice filled with determination. As the Intrepid plunged deeper into the heart of the Tsar Cullen armada, Sam fought to keep the ship steady, his mind focused solely on the task at hand. He could feel the weight of his family's memory bearing down on him, the need for vengeance driving him forward. He knew that he couldn't falter, that he had to rely on his skill and the bond he shared with Captain Mendez to see them through this perilous battle. "Almost there, Captain," Sam reported, his voice tense as the Intrepid shuddered beneath another barrage of enemy fire. "Just a little further." In the command center, Dr. DeSantos worked feverishly, his mind racing as he calculated the exact coordinates for the strike. He could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of their survival resting on his shoulders. But he refused to give in to fear, his resolve hardening as he prepared to deliver the killing blow. "Fire torpedoes!" Mendez barked, his voice filled with authority. The Intrepid trembled as the torpedoes launched, streaking through the void towards the Zarkullan flagship. Time seemed to slow as they watched, hearts pounding, waiting for the impact. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the flagship's reactor core erupted, a cascade of fire and debris tearing through the alien armada. As the Intrepid surged forward, the tide of battle turning in their favor, Sam Hawkins allowed himself a fleeting moment of satisfaction. He knew that their victory was far from guaranteed, that they still faced countless challenges and obstacles in their fight against the Zarkullan. But for now, as he guided the Intrepid through the wreckage of the enemy fleet, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, of pride in the crew that had stood by his side and faced the impossible together. "Well done, Lieutenant," Captain Mendez said, his voice filled with gratitude and respect. "Well done indeed." The Intrepid shuddered as another volley of plasma bolts seared past its hull, the heat radiating through the ship like a fever. Captain Mendez gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white, as he scanned the tactical display before him. The Zarkullan armada had them outnumbered and outgunned, but he refused to surrender, to let them take another innocent life. Commander Russo's voice cut through the cacophony of alarms and explosions, his tone steady and resolute. "Captain, if we can't break their formation, we won't last much longer. I suggest a high-speed thrust towards their flank, using the asteroid field for cover. It's risky, but it might buy us some time." Mendez nodded, his mind racing as he calculated the odds. It was a desperate gambit, but they were running out of options. "Do it," he ordered, his voice laced with determination. "Helm, execute evasive maneuver Alpha 9. As the Intrepid lurched forward, hurtling towards the swarm of enemy ships and the treacherous asteroid field beyond, Mendez couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. He thought of his crew, of their families, and he silently vowed to do everything in his power to protect them. Meanwhile, in the bowels of the ship, Seth Nguyen clung to the console of his fighter, his heart pounding in his chest as he navigated the chaotic battlefield. He had seen his fair share of danger, had faced down death more times than he cared to remember. But this was different. This was war. He glanced at the holographic display before him, his fingers dancing across the controls as he plotted a course through the maelstrom of enemy fire. He knew these fringes of space like the back of his hand, every asteroid and celestial body a familiar landmark in the vast, unforgiving expanse. "Incoming!" Lieutenant Hawkins's voice crackled over the comms, and Seth's eyes darted to the radar. A Zarkullan cruiser loomed on the horizon, its weapons charged and ready. He gritted his teeth, his muscles tense as he prepared to make his move. With a flick of his wrist, he engaged the thrusters, his fighter shooting forward like a bullet. The cruiser's weapons roared, plasma bolts streaking towards him like angry serpents. But Seth was faster, more agile, his ship weaving through the barrage with expert precision. As he closed the distance, he locked onto the cruiser's engines, his fingers poised over the firing mechanism. He took a deep breath, his focus unwavering, and squeezed the trigger. The torpedoes launched, spiraling towards their target like vengeful spirits. There was a flash of light, a thunderous roar, and then silence. Seth's fighter shook violently as the cruiser exploded, its fragments scattering like shrapnel across the void. He let out a sigh of relief, his heart pounding in his chest as he pulled back on the stick, guiding his ship away from the wreckage. "Nice shot, Nguyen," Hawkins's voice echoed in his ear, and Seth couldn't help but smile. It was a small victory, a brief respite in the midst of the chaos, but it was something. And for now, that was enough. Back on the Intrepid, Captain Mendez watched as the cruiser's remains dissipated into the vacuum of space, a grim reminder of the price they were paying for their survival. He turned to Commander Russo, his expression resolute. Keep them on their toes, Vic. We're not done yet. Russo nodded, his eyes filled with determination. Yes, sir. We'll see this through. Together. And with that, the battle raged on, the Intrepid and her crew fighting tooth and nail against the relentless Tsar Cullen armada. It was a desperate struggle, a dance on the razor's edge between life and death, but they refused to give up, to let the darkness consume them. They were the last hope, the final bastion against the encroaching tide, and they would not go quietly into the night. Amidst the maelstrom of chaos, Max Zephyr sprinted through the Intrepid's labyrinthine corridors, his boots echoing against the cold metal floor. The air was thick with smoke, and the acrid scent of burning circuits, a constant reminder of the relentless assault from the Tsar Cullen armada. As he rounded a corner, he skidded to a halt, his heart leaping into his throat. A jagged piece of shrapnel had pierced the hull, creating a gaping hole that spewed sparks and debris into the narrow passageway. Clenching his jaw, Max steeled himself and plunged into the breach. The vacuum of space tugged at his body, threatening to pull him into the void, but he clung to a nearby ladder, his knuckles white with determination. With trembling hands, he worked to seal the gap, applying quick-drying sealant and patching the fractured metal as the ship shuddered around him. Each thud and groan of the Intrepid was a painful reminder of the lives hanging in the balance, and he gritted his teeth, refusing to let them down. As the breach finally sealed, Max allowed himself a brief moment of respite, leaning against the wall and catching his breath. But there was no time to rest. The Intrepid was still under siege, and her critical systems were failing. He pushed himself to his feet and continued his frantic journey through the ship's bowels, racing against the clock to keep her operational. Meanwhile, in the command center, Captain Ryan Mendez stood before a holographic display of the Tsar Cullen armada, his mind racing as he scrutinized the enemy's formation. The flagship loomed menacingly at the center, its reactor core pulsating like a malevolent heart. He knew that exploiting its weakness was their only hope, but the odds were stacked heavily against them. Gathering his trusted advisors, Commander Victor Russo and Captain Theodore Caldwell, Mendez began to strategize. "We need to find a way to exploit that reactor core," he said, his voice laced with urgency. "If we can take out their flagship, it could cripple their entire fleet." Russo, his brow furrowed in concentration, studied the display. "Their defenses are too strong for a direct assault," he warned. "We'll need to find a weakness, a vulnerability we can exploit." Caldwell, his silver hair gleaming in the dim light, leaned heavily on his cane as he considered their options. "Perhaps there's a way to infiltrate their shields, strike at the core from within," he suggested, his eyes alight with cunning. Mendez nodded, his resolve hardening. "We'll need to gather our best pilots, our most skilled engineers," he said, his gaze flickering between Russo and Caldwell. "This will be a suicide mission, and we can't ask anyone to make that sacrifice lightly." As the three men delved deeper into their strategy, the weight of their decision bore down upon them. The fate of the Intrepid, and humanity itself, hung precariously in the balance, and they knew that their actions would either save them or condemn them to oblivion. The stakes had never been higher, and they refused to back down. Throughout the ship, the crew of the Intrepid fought tirelessly, their spirits buoyed by the unwavering resolve of their captain and his trusted advisors. They knew that the battle ahead would be brutal, that the odds were stacked against them, but they refused to surrender. They were the last hope, the final bastion against the encroaching darkness, and they would fight to the bitter end. As Max Zephyr continued his race against time, repairing the Intrepid's battered systems and keeping her afloat, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride in his companions. They were a ragtag group of misfits, brought together by circumstance and united by a common goal, and they had faced insurmountable odds time and time again. And yet, they had always emerged victorious. As the ship shuddered around him, Max gritted his teeth and tightened a final bolt, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that the coming battle would test their mettle, that it would push them to the brink of despair and beyond. But he also knew that together they were unstoppable. And with that knowledge, he found the strength to carry on, to keep fighting, and to hold on to the hope that, together, they would find a way to triumph against the encroaching darkness. The bridge of the Intrepid hummed with tension as Captain Ryan Mendez, his jaw clenched and eyes ablaze, scanned the schematics of the Zarkullan flagship. Commander Russo and Captain Caldwell stood at his side, their expressions a mixture of determination and grim resolve. In the distance, the blare of alarms and the rumble of artillery fire served as a stark reminder of the battle raging outside. Mendez's gaze flickered between the schematics and the faces of his trusted advisors. "We need to exploit this weakness," he growled, jabbing a finger at the reactor core's diagram. "There's no other way." Commander Russo nodded, his weathered face etched with lines of worry. A stealth squadron, then. Small, fast, and deadly. Mendez's eyes narrowed as he considered the proposal. "I want Hawkins and Nguyen on the team. Their skills will be invaluable." Captain Caldwell, his silver hair gleaming under the harsh bridge lights, interjected. "They're both young and reckless, but they're also the best we've got." As the three men hashed out the details of the mission, the lights on the bridge flickered, casting eerie shadows across their faces. The Intrepid shuddered under the relentless barrage of enemy fire, her hull groaning in protest. But amidst the chaos, Mendez's resolve never wavered. He knew that this was their only chance to strike a decisive blow against the Zarkullan armada. Once the plan was set, Mendez turned to address his crew. "This is it, people. We're sending a stealth squadron to take out the enemy flagship's reactor core. Hawkins, Nguyen, you're on point." Sam Hawkins, his sandy blonde hair disheveled and his eyes haunted by the ghosts of his past, squared his shoulders. "I won't let you down, Captain." Seth Nguyen, his purple hair spiked and a wicked grin spreading across his face, cracked his knuckles. "Let's give these Zarkullan bastards a taste of their own medicine." The stealth squadron gathered in the hangar, where they were greeted by the sleek, menacing forms of their stealth fighters. The air was thick with anticipation as they donned their helmets and strapped themselves into the cockpits, the weight of their mission bearing down on them like a crushing force. As Mendez watched from the hangar's observation deck, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. He knew that this mission was dangerous, that it would push his crew to their limits and beyond. But he also knew that they had no other choice. The stealth squadron underwent a grueling regimen of training, honing their infiltration techniques and practicing simulated combat scenarios until their movements became second nature. Every spare moment was spent studying the Zarkullan technology they would encounter, searching for any exploitable weaknesses that might give them an edge in the coming battle. As the days wore on, the stealth squadron grew stronger, more united in their determination to strike a decisive blow against the Zarkullan armada. They pushed themselves to the brink of exhaustion, driven by the knowledge that the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. And as they prepared to embark on their perilous mission, they knew that they would face countless obstacles, that they would have to rely on their wits, their courage, and their unwavering resolve to see them through. But they also knew that together they were unstoppable. And so, with grim determination etched on their faces, they climbed into their stealth fighters and took to the stars, their hearts pounding in their chests and their minds focused on the task ahead. They knew that they were venturing into the heart of darkness, that they would face unimaginable horrors and unspeakable terrors. But they also knew that they would not falter, that they would not fail. They were the last hope, the final bastion against the encroaching darkness, and they would fight to the bitter end to protect their people and their home. With a roar of engines and a blaze of afterburners, the stealth squadron disappeared into the void, their spirits buoyed by the unwavering resolve of their captain and the knowledge that they were a force to be reckoned with. And as they plunged headlong into the heart of the Zarkullan armada, they knew that they would either emerge victorious or die trying. But either way, they would ensure that the Zarkullan knew the true meaning of fear. The stealth squadron, led by the indomitable Captain Mendez, pierced the inky blackness of space like a pack of wolves on the hunt. Their fighters, sleek and sinister, were barely visible against the star-studded backdrop, their engines humming softly as they glided through the void. "Stay sharp, people," Mendez's voice crackled through the comms, his words laced with a quiet intensity. "We're entering Zarkullan territory. Keep your eyes open and your fingers on the triggers." Sam Hawkins, his knuckles white as he gripped the controls of his fighter, cast a fleeting glance at the holographic display projected before him. The cold, clinical data painted a chilling picture. They were surrounded by enemy ships, their numbers vast and intimidating. He could feel the ghostly presence of his slain family weighing heavily on his heart, but he refused to let the darkness consume him. Not here. Not now. "I've got movement on my 6, Seth Nguyen's voice cut through the tension, his tone as cool and calculating as ever. "Enemy patrol, bearing down hard, requesting backup." "On it," Sam replied without hesitation, his fighter peeling away from the formation in a graceful arc. He could see Seth's ship, a mere speck against the cosmic canvas, besieged by a trio of menacing Zarkalan fighters. His fingers danced across the console, activating the ship's cloaking device as he closed the distance. The battle that ensued was a dizzying symphony of light and sound, as Sam's fighter darted and weaved through the chaos, his weapons blazing. He could feel the raw power of the Zarkalan ships as they roared past him, their energy signatures scorching the air. But he remained focused, his mind honed to a razor's edge as he systematically dismantled the enemy patrol, his movements precise and deadly. As the last of the Zarkalan fighters exploded in a brilliant flash of light, Sam allowed himself a brief moment of respite, his breathing ragged and labored. But there was no time to dwell on the victory. The mission was far from over. "Good work, Hawkins." Mendez's voice was a welcome reprieve in the deafening silence that followed the battle. "But we've got a bigger problem ahead. Our scanners are picking up an asteroid field dead ahead. We'll have to navigate through it if we want to stay on course." Sam's heart sank as he gazed upon the holographic display, the massive jagged rocks looming ominously before them. It was a gauntlet that would test the limits of their piloting skills, a treacherous path fraught with danger and uncertainty. "All right, listen up." Mendez's voice was steady and resolute, his words cutting through the doubt that threatened to engulf them. "We'll have to rely on our instincts and our training if we want to make it through this alive. Stick together, watch each other's backs, and whatever you do, don't panic. We can do this." With a deep breath, Sam gripped the controls of his fighter, his determination renewed. He glanced at the holographic display once more, the asteroid field a tangled web of destruction that seemed to defy logic and reason. But he knew that together, they could overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. As their fighters plunged into the heart of the asteroid field, the stealth squadron found themselves in a maelstrom of chaos and destruction. The massive rocks hurtled towards them like colossal, unforgiving sentinels, their jagged surfaces slicing through the void with unyielding force. Sam's heart raced as he deftly maneuvered his fighter through the treacherous landscape, his reflexes honed to razor-sharp precision. He could see his comrades weaving in and out of the debris, their ships mere shadows amidst the chaos, their movements fluid and graceful. But the Zarkalan were relentless in their pursuit, their fighters emerging from the shadows like vengeful specters, their weapons blazing. The stealth squadron fought back with ferocity and determination, their fighters darting and weaving through the asteroid field as they engaged the enemy in a deadly game of cat and mouse. As the battle raged on, Sam found himself locked in a high-stakes chase with a particularly tenacious Zarkalan fighter, the alien ship nipping at his heels like a ravenous beast. He could feel the cold, calculating gaze of Zarkalan Prime bearing down on him, its malice palpable even from a distance. He knew that he couldn't afford to falter, that he had to remain focused and composed if he wanted to survive. And so, with a steely resolve, he pushed his fighter to its limits, the engines screaming in protest as he navigated the treacherous asteroid field with unerring precision. In the end, it was a calculated risk that proved to be Sam's salvation. He spotted a massive asteroid looming ahead, its surface pockmarked and scarred from millennia of cosmic collisions. He knew that it was a gamble, that the asteroid could just as easily destroy him as it could the Zarkalan fighter. But he also knew that it was a chance he had to take. With a deep breath, Sam activated the ship's afterburners, his fighter rocketing towards the massive asteroid at breakneck speed. He could feel the heat of the Zarkalan fighter's weapons searing the air behind him, the alien ship hot on his tail. As the asteroid loomed ever larger before him, Sam's heart raced in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew that he had mere seconds to make his move, to execute the maneuver that would determine his fate and that of the stealth squadron. And so, with a burst of raw, unbridled determination, he pulled. The reactor core of the Zar-Kolon flagship loomed before the stealth squadron, a monstrous mass of pulsating energy and alien technology. Seth Nguyon's heart raced as he planted the last of the explosives, the cold sweat trickling down his backbone. He knew that the slightest misstep could spell doom for the entire mission and the lives of his comrades. "Sam, how much time do we have?" Seth's voice crackled over the comms, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit chamber. "Not long enough," Sam Hawkins growled, his fingers dancing over the controls of his fighter's scanner. "I've picked up multiple heat signatures closing in on our position. We need to get out of here now." As if on cue, the air around them seemed to shimmer and distort, and the hulking figure of Zar-Kulon Prime materialized before them, its advanced alien armor gleaming menacingly in the dim light. The squadron's blood ran cold as they braced themselves for the inevitable onslaught. "Foolish humans!" Zar-Kulon Prime's voice boomed, resonating through the chamber with an otherworldly echo. "You thought you could infiltrate my flagship and destroy me? Your arrogance will be your undoing." A phalanx of Zar-Kulon warriors appeared behind their enigmatic leader, their weapons trained on the stealth squadron. The squadron's fighters hummed with energy as they prepared to make a desperate last stand. But just as the Zar-Kulon were about to open fire, a mysterious figure emerged from the shadows, his face obscured by a tattered hood. The ghost, the enigmatic saboteur, had arrived. "You're walking into a trap," the ghost hissed, his voice barely audible over the din of the reactor core. "There's an escape route, hidden beneath the floor, but you'll have to move quickly if you want to avoid capture." Without hesitation, the squadron sprang into action. Max Zephyr, the young mechanic, quickly disabled the reactor's security system, allowing Seth to rewire the explosives for remote detonation. Meanwhile, Sam Hawkins and Lieutenant Hawkins engaged the Zar-Kulon warriors in a fierce firefight, buying their comrades precious seconds to escape. As the chamber erupted into chaos, the ghost revealed a hidden panel in the floor, leading to a narrow, winding passageway. The squadron rushed headlong into the darkness, the Zar-Kulon's explosive fire lighting up the chamber behind them like a deadly fireworks display. "Sam, can you hold them off?" Commander Russo barked, his voice strained as he sprinted through the passageway, his powerful legs propelling him forward with remarkable speed. "I'll do my best," Sam grunted, his eyes narrowed with determination as he expertly dodged enemy fire. "But we're running out of time." As the squadron raced through the twisting labyrinth of the Zar-Kulon flagship, they knew that their chances of survival were slim. But they also knew that they couldn't afford to fail. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders, and they would stop at nothing to complete their mission and deliver a crushing blow to the Zar-Kulon armada. With their hearts pounding in their chests and their adrenaline surging, the stealth squadron pressed on, their resolve unyielding in the face of overwhelming odds. They would fight until their last breath, and they would not go down without a fight. And so, as they emerged from the passageway and into the cold, unforgiving void of space, the stealth squadron prepared for the final, desperate battle that would determine the fate of their world and the future of humanity. As they engaged the Zar-Kulon armada in a fierce dogfight, the squadron knew that they had only one chance to succeed. They would have to rely on their skill, their courage, and their unbreakable bond as a team. And as they soared through the stars, their fighters weaving and darting through the vast expanse of space, the stealth squadron knew that they would stop at nothing to emerge victorious and strike a decisive blow against the Zar-Kulon threat. For they were the last line of defense against the encroaching darkness, and they would not falter in their sacred duty to protect the innocent and vanquish the forces of evil. And so, with their hearts ablaze with the fires of righteous fury, the stealth squadron charged headlong into the fray, their eyes fixed on the ultimate prize, the destruction of the Zar-Kulon flagship and the salvation of humanity. The end of the scene should be a mix of 40% dialogue, 30% action, 30% interior thoughts from the character. As Sam Hawkins expertly guided his fighter through the chaos of the space battle, his thoughts turned to his family, the loved ones he had lost to the Zar-Kulon's relentless onslaught. He knew that he couldn't bring them back, but he could avenge their deaths and ensure that their sacrifice was not in vain. "Sam, focus!" Lieutenant Hawkins snapped, her voice cutting through the static of the comms. "We need to coordinate our attack on the flagship's reactor core." I'm with you, Lieutenant, Sam growled, his eyes narrowing as he locked onto the massive, pulsating core of the Tsar Cullen flagship. Let's end this. As the stealth squadron closed in on their target, the Tsar Cullen Prime's voice echoed ominously through the void of space, a chilling reminder of the enemy's seemingly insurmountable power. You cannot defeat me, humans, the Tsar Cullen Prime sneered, its voice dripping with malevolence. Your pathetic attempts to resist will only lead to your annihilation. But the squad. Captain Mendez's heart pounded as he stared at the reactor core, now bristling with a newly erected energy shield. The once vulnerable target was now a fortress, protected by the Tsar Cullen's foresight. The flagship loomed above them, a monstrous predator, seemingly invulnerable. Damn it! Mendez growled, clenching his fists. They were ready for us. Lieutenant Sam Hawkins's face contorted in frustration. We can't just sit here and do nothing. We need to find another way. Dr. Elliot DeSantos's fingers danced across the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. Captain, we can attempt to overload the power regulators connected to the shield. If we can successfully destabilize them, the shield will drop long enough for us to strike. Commander Russo's eyes narrowed. But that would mean getting even closer to the reactor core. It's suicide. Not necessarily, Seth Nguyen interjected. If we can create a diversion, draw some of the heat away from the flagship, we could buy ourselves the time we need. Captain Mendez turned to Max Zephyr. Max, how quickly can you rig a bomb to overload those regulators? Max's hands were already moving, pulling wires and components from the supply kit. Give me 10 minutes, Captain. I'll get it done. As Mendez watched his crew spring into action, he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride. They were outgunned, outnumbered, but not outmatched in spirit. He turned to Sam, his voice resolute. All right, Lieutenant. You and Seth will create the diversion. You'll need to be fast and precise. Sam nodded, determination shining in his eyes. We'll make it work, Captain. As Sam and Seth prepared to launch their fighters, Mendez took a deep breath, steeling himself for the battle ahead. He knew that the odds were against them, but he also knew that they couldn't afford to fail. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. The tiny fighters darted through the chaos of the battlefield, weaving between the towering capital ships and dodging the relentless barrage of enemy fire. Sam gritted his teeth as he pushed his ship to its limits, the roar of the engines drowning out the doubts that threatened to consume him. He couldn't afford to falter now, not when so much was at stake. Seth's voice crackled over the comms, a steady presence amidst the chaos. We're in position, Sam. Let's give 'em hell. As the pair launched their attack, the Tsar Cullen forces turned their attention to the new threat, their weapons blazing as they sought to eliminate the intruders. Sam and Seth danced through the maelstrom, their ships a blur of motion as they evaded the enemy's relentless assault. Back on the Intrepid, Captain Mendez watched the display anxiously, his eyes fixed on the power regulators that guarded the reactor core. Come on, Max. We're running out of time. Max's fingers flew over the console, his brow slick with sweat as he raced against the clock. Almost there, Captain. Just a few more seconds. In the midst of the battle, Sam's mind drifted back to his family, the loved ones he had lost to the Tsar Cullen's wrath. He could see their faces, hear their laughter, and he knew that he couldn't let their memories fade into darkness. He would fight, not just for vengeance, but for the hope of a brighter future. With a final burst of speed, Sam and Seth broke through the enemy lines, their ships screaming as they tore towards the power regulators. The Tsar Cullen forces gave chase, their weapons blazing, but the two pilots held their course, their resolve unwavering. Max's voice echoed through the comms, triumphant and exhausted. I've got it, Captain! The overload sequence is initiated! As the power regulators began to destabilize, the shield protecting the reactor core flickered and died. Captain Mendez's eyes lit up with fierce determination as he turned to his crew. Now's our chance. Hit them with everything we've got. The Intrepid surged forward, its weapons blazing as it tore towards the exposed reactor core. The Tsar Cullen flagship trembled under the onslaught, its hull buckling as the Intrepid's fury was unleashed. As the reactor core began to crumble, Sam and Seth pulled away from the flagship, their fighters weaving through the debris as they raced to safety. The Intrepid followed close behind, its engines roaring as it streaked towards the safety of the asteroid field. In the command center, Captain Mendez watched as the Tsar Kulan flagship was consumed by the explosion, its once imposing form reduced to a cloud of dust and debris. He let out a sigh of relief, his heart swelling with pride as he turned to his crew. "We did it," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "We actually did it." As the cheers of the crew echoed through the ship, Captain Mendez knew that the battle was far from over. The Tsar Kulan armada was still a formidable foe, but for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that victory might just be within their grasp. The Intrepid soared through the stars, a beacon of hope in the darkness, its crew united in their determination to free humanity from the Tsar Kulan's tyranny. And as they looked towards the future, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together.